Welcome to Aging on the Suncoast. I'm your host, Jason Martino. The caregiving role in the senior population is generally pictured as the spouse taking care of a spouse, or an adult son or daughter taking care of parents. However, a fast-growing segment of society has altered this picture. Children are often displaced from custodial parents due to a variety of reasons. Upon that displacement, these children are sometimes put under the care of a grandparent or older relative. When this occurs, caregiving responsibilities become both complex and hard to manage. On today's show, we've invited Larry Cooper, the director of the Kinship Services Network with the Children's Home, and John Herbst, the director of Elder Law with Gulf Coast Legal Services. Together, our two guests will shed light on the complexities of grandparents or other relative caregivers raising children. Larry, welcome to Aging on the Suncoast.
Thank you. Good morning.
John, welcome to Aging on the Suncoast as well.
Glad to be here.
When I spoke a little bit earlier, Larry, I described a typical role that we see as an area agency on aging is that we predominantly deal with caregivers that are roughly around the same age. Generally, it's the wife taking care of the husband, and/or it's a son or daughter. But as I indicated on there, there's a fast-growing population out there of either grandparents or other relative caregivers that are raising children these days. Help us understand really what that picture looks like and maybe how it's different than the typical caregiver scene.
Yeah, and it's a fast-growing part of society. We're seeing our formal child welfare system reaching back out, looking for relatives, looking for grandparents because of the child abuse and neglect issues that are happening for a variety of reasons, which I know we'll talk about. And so grandparents are being asked sometimes in the middle of the night to take on the care of 3 children, many times with a variety of different needs, a variety of different issues, sometimes health, academics, and other things. So they have to figure out quickly how they're going to manage, because many of them may still be coming to the end of their career or may have already retired and their income is now fixed or kind of settled about what their plan's going to be, and now being asked to take on the needs and sometimes having to parent all over again, so parenting a second time around, and so it leads them to a lot of complex issues that they have to face and not always sure where to go, and there's a lot of embarrassment sometimes about the fact that they are now taking care of their adult child's children and having to explain that to others, so a lot of times they don't often reach out for help and try to figure this out on their own and find that to be really difficult.
We have a very resilient community out there, and it's such a hard question that if there was a police officer came to my door and I was a grandparent and he had 2 of my grandchildren in tow, I'm sure I would be probably pretty reluctant to tell that police officer, no, I'm not going to be able to do that. And sometimes they're faced with that position, and I think we honor those grandparents for really stepping up and doing that. And I think that's why we're having this show today, so we can talk about ways that we can mitigate disaster in those kind of blended families and offer some assistance to keep that dynamic going. Let's go into a little bit about what are some of the reasons why grandparents and/or other relative caregivers are taking care of their children. It's probably not as simple as 1 or 2, right?
No, I think we hear a lot in the news about drug epidemics, and we went through the prescription drug issues, and now it's heading into heroin addictions and a variety of other pain medications and things. So there's a lot of abuse and neglect of children due to drugs, which then leads into issues of domestic violence. It's leading into issues of mental illness for parents. We've had death due to health of a parent. A few years ago it was military deployment, so we had a lot of parents who were deployed and needing a relative to step in to take care of the children. So we had a variety of different issues that were showing up, and more grandparents were doing this. A lot of them were doing this traditionally, generationally, have happened for years, where a grandparent or relative helped and stepped in, but now the formal systems are getting involved with parents and looking to relatives first prior to placing into foster care, because we know in foster care kids are going to be potentially separated from their siblings, have no contact with their extended families, and that's a huge loss for kids. And so we really want to make sure if we can get them to a relative. We know grandma's oftentimes the center of the universe for many families and allows the kids to maintain those contacts. with the rest of the family. The other challenge is that some of our families, as you mentioned, it's multi-generational. You have a grandmother who's also caring for their husband, even an elderly family member, a parent of their own. So they're that sandwich generation, so they're kind of caught in between of all those things. So there's a variety of different stressors that the family's facing.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Thanks for filling us in. When there are laws that protect custodial families out there, the mother and the father of the child or the children out there. And I imagine for whatever reason, when that child gets displaced and has to go live with a relative caregiver and grandparents, the laws probably change. They probably shift a little bit for protection purposes and whatnot. Anything that you can share to let us know how these laws differ back and forth? Is there more rights for a grandparent or relative caregiver? Is there less rights?
Well, in reality, there's overall, there's really not a lot of rights for grandparents. Okay, so unless they're placed with the grandparents through DCF or placement, their overall rights are slim to none. Mm-hmm. And that's a whole other discussion we'll probably get into about parents who want to have, grandparents who want to have visitation. But the dovetail on what you're saying, you have one of the other reasons you have children having children, and then they're unable to support those kids, and that's when you have grandparents which are really young sometimes, under 50, or sometimes the flip side of that, you have grandparents which were over 80. And then you have the aspect of financial. They don't have the financial means sometimes to raise their grandkids. Yeah. And that's where some of the kinship money comes in, where they can manage that.
And we were talking about how many times the grandparents will come to us and they'll say, I don't have even a piece of paper to have custody of these children, so I'm really nervous about what that means. Or sometimes they have a power of attorney that the parent filled out, or they're not even sure, again, what that can allow them to do. Sometimes they get custody through the state, so they get legal custody through the state, but that's in a smaller section of the population, so it's probably about 25%. But the majority of families, it's the parent placing with the relative or the grandparent, and then the grandparent trying to navigate healthcare, school issues, a variety of different things. Yeah. And they don't even have a piece of paper to walk in with. We've seen it, where they've had something on a napkin where they wrote, Grandma can take care of the kids, and that doesn't really get them very
and then
far.
You have problems with, like I said, you have problems getting the kid enrolled in school. You have problems getting the child into the doctor, into an insurance plan, or all those things that basically they're just left, swinging in the wind with no help at all.
I imagine that the learning curve for somebody taking on this role is immense. I mean, it's hard enough to learn how to age in place, age successfully, navigate, the word that you chose, the different types of resources for myself or another out there. And then when you have that generational gap and you're having to learn, you may have known what happened 70 years ago when it came to enrollment in school, but it's entirely different nowadays, and to pick that up, it's just another responsibility that's probably pretty cumbersome for that person to do it. We, the Area Agency on Aging obviously serves folks in Pinellas and Pasco County. The years that I've known you, Larry, I know that you work with the Children's Home, and they have a larger catchment area too. But help us understand what the prevalence of this type of situation is around either the state or the counties that we work in.
Sure. So locally in the kind of Tampa Bay area, we have literally over 15,000 grandparents that are head of household raising a grandchild, which amounts to over 40,000 children in the Tampa Bay area displaced, living with a relative. And then when you broaden that out to the state, we're looking at over 380,000 children. We're third in the country in the numbers living with relatives due to the kind of transient nature that Florida may have, the bigger elder population that Florida has in many states. So, and Florida really doesn't have a system that has the capacity for more kids to go into foster care or to even license a grandparent as a foster parent. So they really call on grandparents more often than many other places do. So it's a huge issue, and around the country the number is actually coming up to almost 7 million children living with a relative across the country.
Get out of here. Is that a number, is the trend of that increasing over the years?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It continues to trend up. In 40 out of the 50 states, foster care numbers are going down by almost 30%. So I said, you know, where are all those kids going? Because the prevalence of child abuse and neglect hasn't gone down.
Right.
So we know that the direction is towards relatives. So I know maybe like within the last 10 years it was around 4.2 million children, and now we're heading up into almost 7 million around the country.
That's amazing.
And Florida is actually, the state has actually helped that a little bit along. They, you know, before we just have temporary custody, and that was a whole thing that you went through. Now they have concurrent custody, so the actual parents can help out with the situation and assign the rights over there legally for the grandparents to take control. And instead of just having that napkin and a piece of paper, you now have the idea of concurrent custody. And the aspect in what's nice about this is that the parents don't believe they're actually giving up their rights totally, because they can have the child back at any time. They can, you know, say, okay, thanks Grandma, thanks Grandpa, we want our child back. You know, my life has changed and we're better off. In the past, you can only have like temporary custody, and the grandparents were assigned temporary custody. Even though it's that temporary custody, that was basically full-time custody, because for the parents to get the child back, you had to petition the court again and say, now my situation has changed, and now it's in the best interest of the child to come back to me. And that was a whole legal aspect. Whereas, you know, the concurrent, it's a lot more flexibility.
Okay.
And just and if I could just add to that, with concurrent custody, you know, one of the things that we've seen is that you have parents who are also living in the home with the grandparents. They're incapacitated due to mental health or substance abuse or physical health issues, and so they're, you know, again, have those multi-generational homes, and the grandmother is literally doing all of the academics, the health care, the other needs of the children, and so this allows the parent to, you know, safely pass that responsibility over, so it, you know, brings down the barriers for the grandparent to then go get the needs met for the children. Yep. So it makes a huge difference, and we don't see not enough families using that concurrent custody, because that many don't even know about it. There's a lot of advocacy.
Fairly new.
Yeah, it's fairly new, and there's a lot of advocacy in Tallahassee just to pass that along because of the worries of the parents losing their rights. And this really gave them a new opportunity to share, almost like share custody with their the grandparent, in order to safely keep those kids out of foster care.
And believe it or not, for every grandparents' rights group out there, they happen to be parents' rights groups too. So they were clashing. So this was a way to kind of morph the interest of both groups.
Yeah, let's talk real quick about some impacts that you all have seen in the community, and we have a short time before we go to break. So let's concentrate on the senior, that individual that's taking care of that child right now. Obviously, there's a multitude of different impacts, probably more negative than positive. I don't know, but what are some of the impacts? I know that we in the normal senior population, finance and housing has always been one. Is there any?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, some of the federal studies look at the cost of raising a child to be almost $900 to $1,000 a month to raise a child. And so if you're getting 2 or 3 children, do the math, and you're really looking at, well, where does that going to come from? When, again, you're coming to the end of your career, or you're already moved into retirement, you know, where are you going to come up with another $800, $1,000 a month for child care, for food, for school clothes, other services that the child's going to need? So finances, as John mentioned earlier, is a huge piece. The other part is the physical health from the stress of now having to deal with a parent who may be combative or adversarial because of, again, drugs and other mental health issues, to then shelter the kids from the impact of that. So they're, you know, covering and protecting the children. They're going through this stress. And sometimes they're getting babies right out of the hospital. So they're getting kids that, you know, they have to start with a crib and diapers and night feeding and those things. But on the flip side, you know, one of the things that caregivers share is the joy of getting to parent again and play again and do some of the fun things that grandparents get to do on a more full-time basis. As you know, as families have moved across the country, you don't get to spend as much time with your grandchildren. So in some ways they get to rekindle those relationships, but at the same time there's those burdens, as you mentioned, that our caregivers are seeing. And one of the things that we're really tracking is the health of the caregivers, and you see it in the elder care population of decreased health and mortality rates for seniors taking care of a family member who's elderly and poor health. those kind of physical health impacts on them. So we're really focusing on a variety of different issues to support them.
Yeah, it really seems like in the population that we serve, you have limitations in physicality and disabilities and all that, and possibly adding a child into the picture is going to exacerbate that, some of the things that they're already currently dealing with on there. There's got to be an emotional impact to all this. The fact that their lives they're in an adjustment period. You know, they may have just had great plans and had a map of their life planned out where they're going to relax, and now it's uprooted a little bit, and they have to kind of adjust with that as well.
Or it could be worse than that too. It could be living in a 55+ park, or even subsidized housing. So.
Thank you, and we're going to take a quick break. Please stay with us while we take a short break. As usual, don't forget to have a pen or pencil ready. During the break and at the end of our show, we'll be running contact information for the Aging and Disability Resource Center's helpline, the Children's Home, as well as Gulf Coast Legal Services.
Elder abuse is always devastating, but it may not always be obvious. Isolation, coercion, and the withholding of medication are only a few of the more subtle forms of elder abuse that occur every day to thousands of our senior citizens. Please join me in the fight to end elder abuse. Our elders deserve better. Visit the website of the National Center on Elder Abuse. It's time to speak up.
Welcome back to Aging on the Suncoast. During the first half of the show, Larry Cooper and John Herbst helped us understand the reality of grandparents and or other relatives raising children. Now let's examine the types of services the Children's Home and Gulf Coast Legal Services can offer to assist these blended families. Larry, John, welcome back to the show. On the first segment of the show, we tried to really paint a picture of what was going on with these new blended types of families. And we talked a little bit towards the end about the impacts that seniors feel when they have a child or children come into their life at that time. But obviously there's impacts on the child for entering this new domain of living as well. You mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the primary impact for the kids is loss and the trauma that they've experienced due to what they were going through with the parents. Many times they could be moving around from hotel to hotel, from couch to couch. They're missing school, they're not connected to their peers. And so trauma and loss and kind of psychological issues show right up in anger and outbursts and fears and anxieties that the children are going to show in the home with their grandparent. They're having educational needs because many times the parents' focus was not on the needs of the child. So grandparents are having to get tutoring in place. They're looking for help academically. And then the healthcare needs of the kids have been neglected. So we see dental, traditional immunizations, other basic things that you assume the parent would have taken care of are left, and the grandparents trying to figure out where do I start and pick up these pieces to meet the basic needs of the kids. Even clothes, a lot of times the sheriff's dropping them off. They don't have clothes, they don't have school clothes, they don't have backpacks, they don't have basic needs. Bedding, get a grandchild right out of the hospital, it's an infant, toddler. Grandparents aren't going to be equipped with diapers, cribs, blankets, the basic things that they're going to need. So they're struggling to try to figure out, ages, a variety of different ages of needs that the kids are going to have.
What a big void to fill for on the senior or the adult's part as well as the child's part on there. And I think about the academics. I mean, there's different ages, and they all vary of when they're going to come into that new situation. Some of them might be in high school, some of them might be in middle school, and some of them might, like you said before, there's been infants and toddlers that have been dropped off at that time. It's
they are going to suffer academically.
Oh yeah. I can imagine that as well. So let's talk a little bit about your agencies and the different types of services that you do. I wanted to make sure that we put considerable time in that because I think people are interested in that. And so Larry, why don't you start? Why don't you tell us a little bit about the Children's Home?
Yeah, the Children's Home is actually one of the oldest non-for-profits in the South. We've been around since 1892.
Wow.
It was kind of housed in downtown Tampa as an orphanage, kind of that old school orphanage for abandoned and orphaned children. A lot of health issues back in the turn of the century, and so many parents were not living long lives and a lot of abandoned children. And over the years, we've really become more of a treatment center for kids in the foster care system. So we have a residential group home, but we also do community work. So we really work to serve and support and preserve families. So we do a lot of in-home work with families to support their needs and get them identified with resources that are out in the community and put different variety of family strengthening services in place. So we have Healthy Families, which works with moms and their young babies. We have our kinship program. We have our SEEDS program, which works with moms and dads to work on academic issues with their children and better communicate with the schools. And then we also have community resource centers for families with children, so they can come in and get all sorts of different educational resources, health resources, and just a nice place for support and advocacy for families.
Nice.
So we are serving Hillsborough, Pinellas, and Pasco here in the Tampa Bay area, and now serving a little bit out in Orange County with relative caregivers out there, because they see the same need that we're seeing here in the Tampa Bay region.
Great summary, and I appreciate that. And we'll go back a little bit. I'll come back to you a little bit later, and we'll go really delve into the Kinship Services Network, which I think is pretty choice topic to talk about right now. John, tell us a little bit about Gulf Coast Legal Services.
We're a not-for-profit legal aid. There's no charge for our services so long as you meet either, if you're under 60, meet guidelines for income. But if you're over 60, it's all no income guidelines. Also above 55, if you're dealing with the idea of grandparents' rights. We deal with things with domestic violence, elder law, immigration, housing, foreclosures.
Sounds like a litany of things you cover. Legal issues,
fair housing, yes.
Benefits. And
Oh yeah, food stamp benefits and public benefits on top of that. So, like I said, if you're under 60 or under 55, if you have doing the kinship stuff, there's no guidelines for income. But if you're over 60, the guidelines, it's any amount of money. We get most of our funding from the Florida Bar Foundation and the Area Agency on Aging, plus county and city, and some state funding and private donations too.
And the Area Agency on Aging appreciates everything you do with the funding that we get. And I didn't remark, but the some of the funding that we have that we utilize for legal services is Older Americans Act dollars. And back in 2006, I think that the leaders up in the federal department were smart, because they realized that the National Family Caregiver Support Program was a they really wanted to take a look at that program and serve people that were caregiving, either spouse to spouse over 60 and or the grandparents or the relative caregivers in there. And I believe that's one of the reasons why the Area Agency on Aging contracts with you. We also contract with folks in Pasco County. That'll be Bay Area Legal Services over there. Larry, let's go back to the Kinship Services Network on there, because I know that you offer a litany of different types of services that really help out the population that we have been talking about for the first and the second segment today.
Yeah, and as John said, our service is a free service for any relative, regardless of income. When you're a relative or a grandparent raising a grandchild, and can be referred in by anybody. You can refer yourself, or any community provider, school social worker can refer a family to get services. So the nice thing is we go immediately, contact the family, get out to the home, do in-home supportive services, have the family tell us, what is it that you need? What is it that you have in place? How can we strengthen that, support that? And so we'll do things such as, like I mentioned earlier, basic needs, clothing, food, toiletries, hygiene supplies, to make sure that they have those things immediately in place. And then we start looking at those higher level needs of psychological counseling, the kids' academic needs. So we can put tutoring into the home. We work with Bay Area Big Brothers Big Sisters to look at mentoring for some of the kids. We'll work with Bay Area Legal and Gulf Coast to make sure that the legal issues are resolved, or at least advised to the family. So that, again, is no cost to the family. Now, if there's a filing fee, if the family doesn't qualify for a waiver, then we can try to work with the family to assist to make sure that they could file for that temporary custody, which is going to be valuable to them. So we do support groups. So all around the Tampa Bay area, we have these groups that meet for during the day or even in the evening, so families can meet other caregivers, they can share issues, concerns, and resources, so they can like share, you know, where I found the best counselor, where I found the social worker that can help me in the school system. You know, who are these people and what are these benefits? You know, how can I help? We're going to lead them to those things. So just a variety of different ways that we can step in.
It's a beautiful thing when I've had some experience with some support groups and watching peers, talking to peers and learning from each other some of the best practices or what not to do in some situations on there. I think it's, I can't measure the positive impacts that comes from that. I'm glad you're able to supply all those support groups. And generally those support groups, in my experience, have been facilitated by people that are actually in the population that they're trying to help out.
We hire grandparents who have raised grandchildren themselves, and so they can kind of lead from experience. So many times grandparents are in shock, they're overwhelmed, and so when they come to a group and they meet a grandparent who's been on that journey kind of a few steps ahead of them, and they can say, you know, it's going to be okay, you know, here's what we did. You're going to come out better on the other side of this. The kids are really going to benefit from the role that you're doing, and because many grandparents are feeling guilty, they're, you know, not sure if this is going to be the best for the kids, and so when they can see other grandparents doing well and the kids are excelling and improving their situation, it's a breath of fresh air for them. It puts a lot of wind in their sails to feel good about what they're doing, and for themselves as a grandparent, having to balance that role of grandparent and parent that they have to take on. So those support groups really add a lot of energy into the home to make that job a bit easier if we can.
Nice. Respite has always been a service that the Area Agency on Aging has tried to provide as much as we possibly can to give that caregiver a break from the caregiving duties that they do. Do you offer any type of respite services either like in the home or so that person can go to an actual support group? And
Yeah, we have a couple of things. We work with a local agency called Park, and they provide up to 15 hours a month of in-home respite, so the grandparent can go to the doctor, can get to a meeting, can just get a break and you know, recuperate. And then the support groups, we have the evening groups, we do things for the kids and separate things for the caregivers, so they get a little bit of a break. We have some fun stuff happening on both sides of the equation, and so you know, we try to add some joy to the grandparents and things fun for the kids. We do community outings, movie nights, dinners together, just a variety of things that kind of build connections through the generations. So we'll do some generational activities where they're building things together that they can take forward into this kind of new family home system of these multi-generations.
Awesome. I heard you pretty clearly saying that you work very closely with Bay Area Legal and Gulf Coast Legal over there. I imagine if somebody comes in and they contact John first or contact you, they're going to get linked up on there. I really appreciate you gentlemen being on our show today. It's been a while since we talked about this topic here, and I hope that the community got all the good information from this as I did too. So we hope you enjoyed this month's broadcast. We also hope this episode offered you a valuable information on where to seek help if your family situation is one like we described today. We'll be back next month, and until then, please make every attempt to seek out the resources and services we discussed today.
Elder abuse is always devastating, but it may not always be obvious. Isolation, coercion, and the withholding of medication are only a few of the more subtle forms of elder abuse that occur every day to thousands of our senior citizens. Please join me in the fight to end elder abuse. Our elders deserve better. Visit the website of the National Center on Elder Abuse. It's time to speak up. Hi, I'm William Maypother. I play Ethan Rahm on the TV show Lost. Let me tell you about a truly lost population. Every single day, thousands of our elderly citizens are subjected to abuse, emotional, financial, physical. Worse, the majority of people who commit these acts are those closest to the victim. Please join me in the fight to end elder abuse. It's time to speak up. Our elders deserve better.